muHarare. Musi wa 1 August kwakaita violence muHarare. Kukapiswa dzimotokari dzeZANU-PF pamaofisi ekuZANU-PF muHarare.
A curious mind would want to know, why would you deploy tanks and water cannons at Harvest House and not at ZANU-PF headquarters?
To this program that is brought to you proudly in partnership with Frederick Newman Foundation and Heart and Soul TV and Radio. This program is called Free Talk, where I am your host, Dara Blessed Mhlanga. Now in studio this evening, I am joined by political players and civic society, where we are going to be discussing the major topical issue that has been at the center of our political discussions over the past few weeks and months. Is dialogue the solution to the crisis that Zimbabwe faces, or those elected into office should simply deliver on their mandate, on their electoral promises of 2018 to get Zimbabwe working again? I'm going to allow Nkosana, the president of APA, to just open for us and give us his view on dialogue. Is it the solution to Zimbabwe's problem?
So thank you very much, Blessed. My starting point is not to discuss dialogue. My starting point would be to, firstly, I think we need to unpack what democracy is. And then we need to identify what the problem we're trying to solve is. My understanding of democracy, when it's properly practiced, is that you get a country, the citizens of a country, being afforded the opportunity to elect and somebody to form an administration which runs the country for a finite period before the next elections. And the citizens, during that time of that administration, have got an opportunity to essentially assess whether their choice of the current administration was correct or misguided, so that they can then review and make adjusted choices when the opportunity comes up next. Let's take examples, because we didn't invent democracy. We just trying to implement something that was invented elsewhere. Look at the recent American elections. 5 years ago, 4 years, just over 4 years ago, Trump was elected. Trump ran the country in his own style, good and bad and what have you. Americans made an assessment during that time. Then they were afforded another opportunity to elect or re-elect or elect somebody else. And they went out and made a choice which indicated that they were taking into account what had happened in the previous period. That's what democracy, that's why the frequency of elections is what it is, so that citizens can review and adjust their decisions and they choose a different administrator. So I am not quite sure what it is we are debating in the case of Zimbabwe. There is arguably an entity elected by the citizens. That entity has got an opportunity to demonstrate whether it's living up to the promises it made to the population of Zimbabwe, until the next opportunity for the citizens to then exercise their right to consolidate that choice if they want to choose them again or make a different choice. That's my understanding of democracy, okay? So that's the first bit. The second bit is, when we're trying to identify a solution, we need to be clear about what the problem we're trying to solve is. In the current circumstances of Zimbabwe, I suppose we've got a problem with multiple facets. We've got corruption, which is rampant in Zimbabwe. We've got lack of meritocracy, where people are given jobs not on the basis of merit, but on the basis of patronage, i.e. my friend, my muzukuru, and all of this nonsense, yeah? We've got an absolute lack of compliance with the constitution and anything that stems from it. I do not know what the role of a dialogue is in solving these things. The government of the day ought to be asked by the citizenry to please comply with these things. And incidentally, they were elected making lots of promises. Part of what should be happening here is that the citizenry should be holding the current administration to account on the backdrop of what promises they made. Are they delivering or not? So where does dialogue come in?
Roshman, the president of the MDC Alliance, what is your standpoint as a political party on the issue of dialogue? Is it the solution to Zimbabwe's problem?
Thank you very much, Blessing, for having me in your program. Secondly, let me also agree in principle with, in particular, the first point that Dr. Moyo made in respect of what democracy is about and what ought to happen. In an ideal world, if we were fully a democratic country, committed to constitutionalism, following what is in our constitution, committed to free and fair elections, committed to accepting the verdict of the people at each and every election, then everything that Dr. Moyo says will be 100% correct. Let those who have won democratically deliver on their electoral promises, and they will be judged by the electorate again at the next election. That is what should be. Unfortunately, that is not what it is. It is not what it is because we do not have democratic elections in this country where the will of the people prevails. So that leads me to your question, why dialogue? Dialogue should then be between or among those who believe that we have not established a proper framework for the people of Zimbabwe to freely, fairly exercise their will, right, in previous elections, so that we can then talk about those things in respect of which we disagree, so that we can at least have national consensus on the type of electoral system, how it is to be managed impartially, fairly, how results are counted, are tabulated, announced in a manner where everybody agrees that this is the verdict of the people. That is why there is a need for dialogue. Since at the very least, and I'm sure it goes beyond that, the formation of the MDC and this participation in elections, we have always had electoral disputes. If you went to Zapu people, for instance, they will tell you that this person goes back to 1980, where Zanla refused to commit its soldiers, its combatants, to assemble points. They practiced killings, violence from them. If you were to listen to the narratives of our Zapu colleagues. So in essence, we need to talk about our democracy. We need to talk about how to ensure that we do proper elections where the free will of the people is respected, is expressed and respected, that the outcome is palpably in accordance with that will. That's what we need to talk about, so that whenever we have an outcome, the winner is undisputed. The winner then has all the rights and obligations that Dr. Moyo has referred to. We will then all simply step aside and oppose and put alternatives until the people have to judge again. But we do not have that situation in Zimbabwe. But in Zimbabwe, it's worse than that. It's not that we even have a civilian dictatorship. What we have is a military autocracy. We have a military which seized the state power in November 2017. And our biggest challenge today in Zimbabwe is, including those civilian politicians who are in ZANU-PF, they might deny it. But the reality of the matter is that we are a military autocracy in this country. And we need to discuss how we get soldiers back into the barracks, not just physically, but also politically. How we re-establish civilian politics, how we ensure that the people of Zimbabwe can freely, truly elect the government of their choice at the interval of elections that are provided in the Constitution of Zimbabwe. Once we do that, the rest is then up to the government which has been chosen by the people to lead and to govern, and for the people to then judge their governance every 5 years as provided by our constitution in Zimbabwe. That is what is at stake. Then there are all other crises, and in the view of the MDC Alliance, all these other crises have their foundation in the political crisis of the suppression, the oppression, the negation of the will of the people to elect a government of their choice. And in particular, the takeover of the state and other civilian institutions by the military in November of 2017. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Linda, your opening remarks on this issue?
Okay, I'm from a different school of thought, where I think the first step to us realizing what we want to realize in Zimbabwe is we have to learn to be honest. We need truthful politicians, not those who indicate left and turn right. One of the major reasons why this country is in crisis politically is the hypocrisy surrounding opposition politics. They go with a message which is toxic to the people, which gives a picture that they are not in good books with the ruling party. Yet behind closed doors, they do businesses together, they have deals together, etc., etc. I want to highlight a point that was raised by Professor Walsh-Mengwe, that we cannot be dialoguing, etc., etc. But I want to draw us back to the November 17 military takeover. It is not a secret that the MDC was a willing partner and that they had had negotiations about that particular action. So they naturally led us into this military government. And those are the facts. Today, to start turning around and say the military did this when they aided the military into power, it does not make sense. It is time for us to say, okay, we put them into power, we took our people into the streets to go and march against Robert Mugabe, and we thought that we're going to have a GNU government, which didn't come. How do we get out of this situation? I think that is where we are supposed to start from. We supported you into getting into power, but how do we get to that point where we are truthful, where everyone who participated in the November 17 agenda comes out to the table? Yes, we did this, we had these arrangements in place, and then that conversation starts from there. This idea of trying to play the blame game now will not work. Let us go back to the basics, let us be truthful, and have our conversation starting from there. Thank you.
Amazing. I want to come to you, Reverend Tata, Kenneth Mtata, for you to be able to give us your opening remarks before we start interrogating the issues.
Let me start by saying I concur with both Professor Welshman Ncube and Dr. Nkosana Moyo, and I think the characterization given by Professor Ncube is, for me, accurate. That what Dr. Nkosana Moyo is presenting is the ideal situation, but what we are confronted with is a situation that requires us to contextualize the whole democracy issue. But I want to go further beyond what Professor Moyo is saying is our problem. I think our biggest challenge is one word that I think we are not addressing, which is the issue of insecurity. The reason why our transitions are troubled is because we have not given security guarantees to so many people who are in power, and therefore who have not known what a transition looks like. Because for a very long time they have been threatened by the reality that the day they are no longer in power, they are going to be arrested and put in prison or sent to The Hague for the crimes that they are accused of. The question I think we need to present, why the dialogue is our only way out, is how do we make sure that anyone who is accused of crimes against humanity, crimes against Zimbabweans, how do we make sure that those people can be given assurances that it is very possible for them to be out of power and still live a free life? That it is possible for them to be out of power and not to have their wealth taken away from them. At the moment, we do not have that framework, and we do not have those guarantees. And that's why it is true what Professor Jonathan Moyo said when he said you cannot reform yourself out of power. He did not really mean that you reform yourself out of power and you go home. Relieving yourself of power is an existential crisis in Zimbabwe. When you are no longer in power, you don't know what your future is like. So until we design a transitional system in such a way that those who are no longer in power can still live a comfortable life, all this ideal situation about democracy will remain, I think, a mirage. What we need is to establish a situation in which people can actually leave power and still live a life that is normal. At the moment, we do not have a framework for that, Mr. Mklang.
Thank you very much. I'll come to you, Mr. Moyo, and say to you, there's been this argument that the problems in Zimbabwe are political, they are not economic. And the lack of legitimacy is the one that is affecting our economy and all other social, political aspects of our life. Do you agree with that point?
Okay, no, before I go there, let me respond to, especially to Welshman and I agree with both of these gentlemen. So starting with Welshman, I agree with his characterization of the problem. That's why I said up front, this issue of identifying what it is we are trying to solve is really pivotal. So the only question I have for him then is, if having agreed on what the problem is, does he really think that a dialogue will solve that problem, because I don't believe a dialogue will solve that problem. So even if I agree with him about the identification of what the challenge is, I do not believe that the dialogue is the platform for it. Now, moving on to the Reverend. Again,
can you explain why you don't believe that the dialogue is the part of the solution?
So you then have to look at the parties. What you're putting there is the conduct of elections is the problem. The people who are sitting there, what exactly are you expecting them to say? When you meet them at a table? What do you want them? What do you expect rationally, intelligently? What can you expect them to say? What are they going to say? They are going to say, we are legitimately elected. And that's the end of the conversation. Where do you go from there? They can't engage in a dialogue without delegitimizing themselves. So in order to legitimize themselves, they have to say, what you're talking about is nonsense. We were properly elected and that's all there is to it. What is the next stage? Now, as far as the Reverend is concerned, again, I choose to say, fine, I see what both gentlemen are mentioning as facets of the problem. I absolutely see that. I'm just not sure, for if we take the Reverend's position about somebody guaranteeing, essentially giving an undertaking that when the outcome and when you are voted out of power, you will not be victimized for crimes committed, whether those are economic or otherwise. Who is going to underwrite that undertaking? Because the parties around the table themselves don't feel safe, or they will not believe. They look at their own conduct and they look at you and they think you are just like them and you are going to do what they would do, i.e. what they promise is not worth what the paper is written on. So who is the underwriter of this particular problem if we're to take it and accept it is part of the issue? It absolutely is part of the issue. But the parties sitting at the table don't trust that you are not just like each other. Those who are currently in power think everybody else is just like them, and they know that they would not honor that promise if they were elected. Again, how do you move from there? How does a dialogue deal with that?
Amazing. Let me come to Welshman and say, do you think, as Nkosana Moyo is saying, do you believe that you'll be able to come to the table and say you stole elections, reform the electoral system so that you don't steal them again, and someone would accept that as a point of getting a result?
Thank you very much, Blessing. Concerns. In fact, I would say his presentation is evidence enough of the need to talk. Before I answer your question directly, in politics, in the history of nations, we have two choices. When there is a societal political disagreement, you get into conflicts which result in violence. You can even go to war in respect of those conflicts. Or you talk about your problems and resolve them without resort to violence. Many conflicts which are underpinned by violence end up at the negotiating table with dialogue anyway. What we're saying is that it is not necessary to get to a conflict where the young people of this country end up engaging in activities which are not peaceful in an effort to establish what are fundamental rights relating to democracy and governance. So why not recognize that we have problems and let's talk about them? And that's the starting point of the MDC Alliance, that you do not need to get to a violent conflict before you can talk and resolve your problems. Granted, there is the issue of the legitimacy of, in particular, the current president of Zimbabwe. But you do not have to start there. You do not have to go to a negotiating table and say you are illegitimate. Let us discuss your illegitimacy. It is not necessary at all. What is necessary is to say, we, those of us who want dialogue, believe that our electoral system is not yielding for a long time, not just in 2018, for a long time, the correct free will of the people. Let us talk about those things that we need to do to our electoral system so that you don't look back, so that in future, in 2023, we do not have the same problems of contested outcome. Let us talk about the future. Let us talk about how we are going to move forward. We do not to be bogged down. We do not need to be bogged down about what happened in the past. And Dr. Moyo Nkosana is perfectly correct that if you were to start by saying you are illegitimate, end of conversation in that dialogue, end of conversation. What therefore is necessary is to say, we, for instance, as the MDC Alliance, others will put on the table whatever they believe are the problems. This is our agenda. Our agenda revolves around ensuring that our electoral systems result in the proper expression of the free will of the people of Zimbabwe. Thereafter, whoever is elected will have the full mandate of those who voted for them, even those who voted against them, to say they were elected, they got the majority. Let us give them the space to implement the program, the policies under which they were elected. It is possible. It is possible. And I believe that the leadership of ZANU-PF, the leadership of President Mnangagwa, should recognize that the onus is on them as the government to ensure that the issues which take us back, which pull us back, which keep us down as a nation are addressed, because they will not succeed if they do not address those issues. Zimbabwe will not succeed. We will keep going round in circles, round and round in circles, and we will not get anywhere. And mark my words on that.
But Nkosana Moyo raises a point that you have not addressed, and this point is that there's an issue of appointing people on lack of meritocracy. There's an issue of corruption that is the one that is bogging down our economy and development. Do people necessarily need to sit down to resolve that issue?
No, not necessarily. Dr. Moyo says this, right? They are what I may call the manifestations of the problem we have. And the issue of appointment of incompetent people is part of the myriad of problems, the myriad of issues that we have. And at this stage, I do not believe that we should be discussing the merits of what should be on the agenda and how to resolve them. For instance, you can't avoid putting on any agenda in Zimbabwe the issue of corruption. Right? But we all accept that corruption is an evil, it is a wrong. The government in power on the day where there is a democracy should deal with it. And if they don't deal with it, it is now for the people to decide at the subsequent election as to whether or not the people wanted to continue to repose their confidence on a government which is itself corrupt, which is unable to deal genuinely, honestly, and openly with corruption. But those are your agenda items. I haven't addressed even those that Masarira referred to, Linda. I'm simply saying those are the agenda items. At this stage, I believe we need to establish the consensus and the need for dialogue. And in my view of ensuring that our electoral systems are democratic, they result in a government which is truly chosen by the people. It is then for the people in subsequent elections to judge as to whether they want to put another political party, another president, another government in place.
If you are just joining us, we are discussing here, is political dialogue the solution to Zimbabwe's myriad of challenges? And in studio, I'm joined by the president of APA, Nkosana Moyo, the vice president of the MDC Alliance, Washman Ncube, the secretary general of the Zimbabwe Council of Churches, Kenneth Mtata, the president of LEAD, Linda Masarira, and we are discussing this topic, is a dialogue the solution to Zimbabwe's problem? This program is proudly brought to you by Frederick Newman Foundation in partnership with Heart and Soul TV and radio. Now, I'll come to Reverend Mtata and say, Reverend, in the recent past, you released a letter from ZCC which spoke about the hindrances of dialogue in Zimbabwe. And among these issues, you say that ZANU-PF does not want, you said it was an issue of ego that was standing in the way, whereas ZANU-PF does not want to come to dialogue because this would reflect a failure on their part. And for the MDC Alliance to also come to dialogue, they are hindered also by certain egos. Now, how does it work? Do you think then that dialogue would then be a solution where we have people of big egos?
I think the whole phrase of egos is, I think, is taken out of context. But I would say that what we, I think the question, if I go back to Nkosana Moyo as he wants to be addressed, I think it is important for us to note that when we come together and say we want to deliberate on the fundamental challenges facing the nation, the guarantors of the outcomes of such a dialogue process include more than Zimbabweans, but Zimbabweans themselves can actually be part and parcel of the guarantees. For example, regarding the violations of the past, if it is part of the agenda for dialogue, where we want to talk about the heads of the dialogue, I think my last comment in this regard is what Professor Welshman has said. At the end of the day, we are going to have a dialogue. It may not be next week or next month, but the way we are stuck in the challenges we are faced with, there is no way out other than another election whose outcomes are going to be disputed, a revolution where there may be very violent outcome or a violent repression. But at the end of it all, we will need to come down to some kind of a negotiated solution, either with a lot of loss of lives, or when people say we can mitigate that and do it before we have had loss of lives. But one day we will come there. This is what happened in 79. It happened in 2007. In 1987, it happened in 2009. And it happened in 2017. 2017, we did not have a negotiated solution, but some people managed to force a solution out, and this is the outcome we are living with. Sooner or later, if we do not find a negotiated solution, one way or the other, we are going to end up finding a solution either through a disputed election a revolution, or we come to the table. Blessing.
Linda, are you now available? Or okay, so initially, Linda, as you came in your submissions, you spoke about the lack of honesty and hypocrisy by politicians. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think that dialogue then presents an opportunity for this hypocrisy to dissolve or to be dissolved, so that the people of Zimbabwe can then find common footing and common grounding that will lead this nation moving forward?
Okay, thank you very much, Blessing. I think the game botanga napa a historical background. Pachivanhu chedu pasichigare. Wherever there was dispute, paita vanhu vasiri kuwirirana. Mune nhau dziri kuda kukurukurwa, mungava mudunhu kana muruzevha. Vanhu vaienda panonzi padare, panokurukurwa nhau idzi. Dzitanga dzataurwa kuti dambudziko ratinaro panapa nderei, torigadzirisa sei, tichizvifambisa sei. And I think right now we have come to that point where everyone is saying we really do have a crisis. We have a problem. But the way that we are doing things is what is wrong, because we are suffering from a scenario where we've got a big man syndrome. I'm the bigger politician. I'm not going to have a dialogue in this particular setup. I also see politicians failing to understand that the dialogue process is not about creating a government of national unity, but about identifying how to deal with the problems that are bedeviling Zimbabwe. That is why I've asked time and again, what is the purpose of a mediator in a dialogue setup? We are not talking of power sharing arrangements here, but we're trying to get to a stage where we say, how do we go forward as Zimbabwe? How do we rebuild Zimbabwe? What is it that got us here, and how are we supposed to abolish some of the systems that have made us to be at this particular stage that we are at? I've said this time and again, and I'll say it again right now. The biggest problem we have in Zimbabwe is the system. And as long as we do not deal with the system, whoever gets into power will be used by the same system, use the same laws that were created by this oppressive, repressive, and suppressive system. So the first port of call, if everyone is sincere, is we should have a dialogue on how to transform the system. The oppression and the repression we see in Zimbabwe is because we have unjust laws that were adopted from the Smith regime, that were never amended, that were never abolished. And the same laws have been used to oppress a lot of opposition activists, a lot of politicians, because those laws were created during the colonial era. And the systems that we use to run government were also adopted from the colonial era. So as much as we want to talk about the reform agenda, even if we come up with the reform points and they're inconsistent with the system, we'll keep on having the same problems. So it is time for us to have this dialogue, to start having this conversation at a political level. But I think my personal opinion is the dialogue that we need in Zimbabwe should just not be political, but it should be holistically inclusive. Include the students, include the vendors, include the business people, so that we'll be able to say what are the challenges that need to be addressed at all the relevant stakeholders' point of view. It is unfortunate that a lot of people.
My question to you would be: those who have been elected, like Nkosana Moyo puts it, those who have been elected into power and given a mandate to run this country for 5 years, can't they just simply deal with those issues without sitting on the table with anyone? Can't they just reform the electoral laws and make it better? Can't they just talk to the students and find out what they want and deal with those problems?
Can I just help you on this? I have to go anyway. May I?
Let us not pretend.
May I?
Yes, sure. Please go ahead, Moyo.
So, Linda.
Yes, go ahead.
So let me tell you, I interpret things slightly differently from you. You say the system. I would argue that it is the intention. You know, if you take our constitution, the 2013 constitution and read it. In fact, I often say to people that leading up to the 2018 elections, we should not have bothered to write a full, what do you call it? In terms of the going to the elections, Takanyora manifesto chichi, the only sentence that was necessary was to say we shall comply with the constitution. It's amazing actually how, although it's not perfect, how good our constitution is. It provides for all of the things we're talking about. Nyaye corruption, nyaye meritocracy, nyaye human rights, it's all there. So to the extent that what you refer to as laws that are not compliant, as you know, and the Welshman will be able to talk to this more than I can, the supreme law of the land is the constitution. So if we had the correct intentions, to the extent that these hangover laws, Kunana, Ian Smith, and so on, are not compliant with the constitution, every single one of them would be able to be shot down with reference to the constitution. It would not be a problem. So our challenge is not the system, as you call it. Our challenge is people and their behavior. If we complied with, even as imperfect as they are, if we complied with the instruments we have today, Zimbabwe would move into a totally without writing another piece of paper. Zimbabwe would be different. All we need is compliance. Constitution yedu haisiri perfect, but haina kushata either. Tikangoitevera chete, tikatevera zvinhu zvese zviri muconstitution, nyika yedu inochinja. So you don't need to go and write another piece of paper kuti tabvumirana zvimwe zvitsva izvi. That's a waste of time.
But in your parting words, Nkosana Moyo, what do you think Zimbabweans need to do to move this country forward?
My humble opinion is the following. I think we underestimate how many Zimbabweans are suffering, including those who on the face of it are suppressing us. Mapuri Isaban, very intelligence, Boku Army. A lot of them are our brothers and sisters. They are our people. And a lot of them are suffering just like everybody else, except a few people right at the top. If Zimbabweans went and voted en masse, and if Zimbabweans went and protected the vote through being electoral agents without expecting to be bought, my feeling is that Zimbabwe would change. I don't think the few people who are subverting our system would be able to hold out. But tinongo complainer, but voter. If you look at the numbers, the majority of Zimbabweans are not voting. And then when we say volunteer and go and do this and this to protect your vote, people don't want, they want to be paid. By who? Corruption, but corruption. We need to make up our minds. I'm sorry, I have to run away. Yeah? I have to see my doctor.
No, thank you very much. There was Nkosana Moyo, the president of APA, and he's got a doctor's appointment. But thank you very much for joining us on this free talk where we are discussing, is dialogue the solution to Zimbabwe's problem, or those who have been elected into office should deal with the myriad of Zimbabwe's problems. Welshman, your party, Linda says people should be able to speak and talk and have a discussion where there's no big man syndrome and everybody else is involved. Your party has refused to be part of Poland. Are you stalling the progress of Zimbabwe because of a big man syndrome?
Thank you very much, Blessing. Maybe let me, in responding directly to your question, let me take one step back. Linda also made the point that in her view, we need to be truthful. The MDC Alliance, or its constituent elements they existed in 2017, did support the removal of President Mugabe. Ipso facto did support the coup, and we must be honest about this. Of course, while I personally disagreed with the marches in November 2017, because there's a person who spent the greater part of his life studying and teaching constitutional law, constitutionalism. instinctively, I always knew that there will never be a good ending to anything which involves the military subverting a civilian government. And therefore, I never marched and never supported the coup in any way, in any form or shape. However, there are lots of my colleagues, there are lots of us in the opposition who are happy to march as we did, to embrace the military as was the case. And I don't think that any of us who did that have denied that. People admit that they did so, and many today admit it was a mistake to have done so, and that it was a mistake to have expected that those who were orchestrating the military coup were interested in a transition which will then see us move from the rule of Mugabe through a transition to a new Zimbabwe. Those of us also had dealt with ZANU-PF in the inclusive government had learned a very hard lesson by that time. As a lawyer, I really never thought that adults would willingly negotiate an agreement, sign it, celebrate it, without the slightest intention of observing its term. I say so because that is what ZANU-PF did when we negotiated the global political agreement, which resulted in the inclusive government of 2009 to 2013. History teaches us that they didn't have the slightest intention of doing any of these things, which takes me to Dr. Moyo's point that if we were to implement the constitution today, if we were to agree that we implement the constitution and most of the laws of Zimbabwe as they are, you would probably not even have the need to dialogue. The problem is that there are repeated attempts, mostly successful, to opt out of the constitutional order, to subvert the constitutional order. And therefore, when we say, let's talk again, let's dialogue, we're constantly trying to say, okay, what did we miss last time, which has allowed them to operate outside the agreed parameters. But if we were at the end of the day to agree that we are patriotic Zimbabweans, that we cherish democracy, that we cherish that any government must derive its mandate from the will of the people, all we need to do is observe the Constitution of Zimbabwe. That Constitution says we have an independent electoral commission, and if indeed we set up an independent electoral commission, stop the military from giving backdoor instructions to the electoral commission, we do proper delimitations, we do proper voters registration without trying to suppress, for instance, registration of voters in areas we don't think we have support. Or if we do not do any of those things and say, let us go and have a proper election, we will all abide by the will of the people. Let the military stay in the barracks as directed by the constitution. Let soldiers be interested only in defending Zimbabwe against intent. We did them as per the current constitution, as per the current law, as Dr. Moyo says. We in fact will do most of the things that need to be done in this country. Then the issue that you constantly raise about the efficacy of government, that is to say, the need for the government to simply do that which it promised to do. It is correct, but they are not doing so. They are constantly opting out of the restraints, the constraints of democracy. They are constantly engaged in illegalities. Right now, they are constantly weaponizing the law against anyone who opposes them, anyone who holds a different opinion. you have the case of Joanna and Cecilia repeatedly arrested, the students again and again wrongfully denied bail. The High Court says what the Magistrates Court is doing is wrong. Again and again, they go back and do exactly the same thing that the High Court has said should not be done, contrary to law, which says the pronouncements of the higher courts bind the lower courts. But all of this happens because we know that in particular, those magistrates who sit in remand court at Rottenroy in Harare are captured and they constantly act outside the law. I call them lawyers against the law. They know it. They know it. We trained them. They know that what they are doing is wrong and is not lawful, but they repeatedly do it because they are commanded somewhere to continue to do it. I don't know whether in that long answer I've dealt with the issue you wanted me to deal with.
Yeah, I asked you, why are you not joining Pollard? Because you talk about dialogue. I think that's a platform for dialogue, is it not?
Look, we are not joining Pollard because we do not believe it is a sincere, genuine platform for dialogue. If it were a genuine, sincere platform for dialogue, we will be the first ones there. But where one of the protagonists sets up a framework and decrees, literally decrees, I am going to do X, Y, Z. You can only talk to me through X, Y, Z. That in itself tells you that there is a fundamental problem. There is a fundamental problem. You cannot, if you accept that there is a problem, then unilaterally set up the framework, commandeer everybody. It cannot be dialogue. There can be no dialogue where parties are commandeered to a particular dialogue framework. We must discuss bilaterally, multilaterally, what is the best way of talking to each other. Some people say we have egos, we are arrogant. We don't intend to diminish the importance of any political party, any political actor. We believe in inclusive dialogue, which involves organization which have a social base, which represent somebody identifiable out there. The churches have a social base. In a dialogue, they will represent the religious people who go to their churches. The students will represent the students. The trade unions will represent the workers. Human rights organizations, etc., etc., etc. When we talk about political parties, surely it cannot be right that if a Welshman Nube and his wife wake up one day and say we are political actors without an identifiable social base, without a political base. In fact, soon after an election where you got less than 0.0001% of the vote, and you then say you are entitled to a seat in some dialogue, and you don't have regard to your representative capacity, that you have a base, a political base, a social base that you represent. And simple because someone registered to contest an election and you say I was a presidential candidate. In each province, I got 3 votes and altogether I had 36 votes. Or I didn't even get more than 10 votes across the country. And you then tell us there must be 23 of us sitting around the table. Come on, can we be serious for a moment and take ourselves seriously as Zimbabwe so that we can resolve the problems of this country? You must, first of all, have some social base that you represent to have a seat at some dialogue. Otherwise, anyone can handpick whoever and wake up the following day and say, we must engage this person and that person and that person. It makes no sense. And we are not interested in playing club.
Right. I'll ask you, John Masuku, you are there, and I'm seeing you are raising your hand. Maybe you've got a question, you can shoot away, my brother.
Yeah, thank you very much, Blessed. A very interesting conversation that we're having, and it's good to see all those veterans arguing about different points. The points raised by Professor Ncube about the fact that we are missing on honesty, on trustworthiness, and as well as sincerity is very, very important. I think he aptly put it across to us. But it would be nice as well to get it from the religious point of view, or from the church point of view, because I think society itself has a role to play in molding, itself towards being honest. We know some parties have been known for years and years to play this Njonjo Tambawaka Chenjera, meaning that even if they join dialogues, it means that they may not be sincere in what they are doing, but they want to see how much advantage they can get out of it. So I hope Dr. Mtata is still around to answer that, or Linda, from their point of view. But as far as Professor Ncube put it across, I think that was very clear. We got his point of view as a constitutional lawyer and a politician. So maybe, Dr. Mtata, the question on honesty, trustworthiness, and sincerity, where are we missing it?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Masuku, for the question. I think the question is how do we want to imagine the future? And many people will resist any imagination of a future they feel excludes them. In other words, we need to lower the stakes of political participation and make sure that it's not a matter of life and death. The reason why our politics is so toxic and dangerous is because it is everything. You get everything or you go down. So I think to expect personal virtue or values like honesty and integrity in a situation where losing political opportunity is a matter of life and death, I think is to expect quite too much from many people. One reason why we think that it's possible to mitigate those fears is also to create a national dialogue process in such a way that from the beginning we are trying to build a win-win outcome, not a winner and loser outcome. Because all the other routes we have at the moment, they produce not only winners, but they also produce losers who do not only lose political power, but who have a chance even of losing their livelihoods and even their lives. So a national dialogue process must give prospects that it is possible that we can imagine a future in which as many people as possible are included. And this is not impossible. In the past, actually, even though they were not perfect, the processes of the past produced some kind of outcomes that were inclusive. If you look at the Lancaster House Agreement, with all its imperfections, allowed the Rhodesian government and the Black Patriotic Front government, the newcomers, the patriotic government, and the losers, the Rhodesian actors, to find some way of coexisting at least for some time. The same happened when we signed the Unity Accord in 1987. There was some semblance of coexistence. The same with the GPA in 2009. These were not perfect outcomes, But because they created a sense of a future that was shared, many people were willing to sacrifice personal benefits for the sake of the common good. So it's not like we are trying to experiment with something that has never worked. We have the imperfect models of processes that have actually worked in the past. There are processes that we know have not worked for us. One of these is where we use winner-takes-all systems, where people are begrudging the process. Because when people feel that the elections are not going to produce an outcome that is free and fair, there is a likelihood that their participation becomes also either indifferent for the many people who do not participate, or for those who are participating, they say, whatever happens, we must win this election at all costs. So we know that if we create an imagination of the future that is broadly inclusive, even those people who are skeptical about participating in a dialogue, they will actually participate because they can see that they will benefit out of it.
Amazing. I'll come to you. I'll come to you, Mugadzaweta. Just your question or contribution before I ask my panelists to give me their closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Blessed, for this discussion. It's quite a rich discussion. But then I would like to start by responding to Reverend Mtata. I feel that this is my feeling and my observation from what has been happening in the country, that if we have a system that allows people to sort of reconcile without having consequences on some other people's actions, let's say past issues that have been perpetrated, I think it gives problems in the country. For example, if you look at the Lancaster, I feel that some of these things are participated by the elite, and the agreement will be based on their union, where the people may not agree, but they are forced to agree because the bigger players have agreed to it. So I would go with the statement that says there's no peace without justice. Somehow I feel that if the politicians that are perpetrating hate amongst the population go scot-free, I don't think people will be very comfortable to see them walking in the streets. I would feel that if someone has acquired wealth through corrupt means, probably let's have a system that allows the constitution or the law to take its course, investigate that person. You have those, you have that wealth taken by the state, because that person is depriving other people resources that are supposed to build. Look at our hospitals and our schools. So if we have a system that we want to forgive people, but then I think the war of the population sometimes is not comfortable if there's no real or true justice that would have happened to people that they feel they've perpetuated hate and instability in the country. So I feel that going forward, we should have a system that promotes accountability and integrity. We need to define what kind of leaders do we need in this country. I think that's about it.
Thank you very much, S. Mugadzawet. I think that's silence, Mugadzawet. Thank you very much for joining this conversation. Now, your comment, I will ask the MDC Alliance Vice President in his closing remarks to actually also respond to what you have said. You know, those that have committed atrocities in the past, or those who were accused of having, you know, being unjust to the people of Zimbabwe, should they, in a negotiated settlement, be guaranteed of safety, or should they face justice? And if that happens, will they be able to be a negotiated transition? And if you, after addressing that, maybe we then come to your concluding remarks.
Well, thank you very much. I'm in full agreement with what Comrade Kataweta has just said, that ultimately, the bottom line is for us to get to a just society where laws are applied across the board, where those who steal, those who are corrupt, those who kill are held accountable for their crimes and their misdeeds. That as a proposition is beyond question, and it must be insisted upon. However, there are certain historical moments in times of transition where those who are holding the power of veto over a transition fear that if they allow a transition to take place, if they allow us to move towards a just society, then they stand to suffer a great deal. They then will rather say, this is a zero-sum game, we are not giving an inch, and we continue in the situation that we're in. Myanmar, the military in Myanmar is the clear example. The transition in South Africa from apartheid to democracy is another clear example. The transition in this country from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe is another, where you have to say, look, this is a price we are prepared to pay. Those who are holding the veto, the instruments of violence, will not allow a transition to take place unless we give them certain guarantees, we give them amnesties, and so forth and so on. Then sometimes you have to do that in order to cross the bridge to a new country, to a more just society. So sometimes you have to do that. However, as a general proposition, impunity is bad, is inherently bad, because it begets more impunity. However, at each historical turning point, you will have to decide as a nation whether granting immunity, I will call it impunity, immunity is a price that should be paid by the nation in order to stop those who are holding the power of veto from vetoing our move towards a better future.
Before we had this conversation, we went into the streets of Harare and said to the people of Zimbabwe, do you think dialogue is the solution to the Zimbabwean crisis? Or people should be able, the government that was elected, the government of the day, should provide solutions? And we will have to listen to what some of their contributions that they have said during this, as they contributed to the topic of the day. Is dialogue the solution to Zimbabwe's problem? And here are their voices, and this is what they had to say.
No, even in Bible, chaimo, vanhu vanotaurirana panenge pakadzi. Asi isusu sevanhu tinofanira kuziva kuti ZANU-PF, that's party yatakatanga nayo, ndiyo yakatisimurira. That's our motherboard, ZANU-PF party. Saka mapolitical parties ese madiki anenge auya, vakaita sana MDC nezvimwe zvese, vanofanira kuenda kuZANU-PF vonotaura neZANU-PF, vobatana voita chinhu chimwe chete. Zvikadaro zvinofamba.
Yes, ZANU-PF should have to deliver solutions. Noda kwekuti zvakataurwa napresident vachiti vanhu vanofanira kuenda kumabasa, havafi kukwanisa kuti vazvisadzidzise. Uyezve tikatarisa isusu semayuthi kumashure, zvakanga zvakapromiswa panguva yemavhoti yakaita inclusive, mabasa akaenda kumabasa kusvika nanhasi zvachienda kumabasa, asi pakangonzi MDC ngaimhende pasaidi. Zvinhu zvakatitorera nguva yekuti tikwanise kuziva kuti upenyu hwedu tinofamba sei. Saka inini hangu seni ndinechiti kana zvichinge zvakona ngavambosiro vamwe kuti vaone kutonga kupatana.
Do you think dialogue is the solution, or ZANU-PF should just deliver on its promises?
Do you think? I think dialogue is the solution, because ZANU-PF so far has failed. I think it has failed to deliver its promise. So, if dialogue, I think dialogue will be better. better. I've seen it before. So I think dialogue is better. ZANU-PF should do dialogue. I think dialogue is better. We are going for 2023 elections. So for now it has failed to fulfill its promises. So if they do dialogue, I think maybe most of our citizens will be happy, and the economy and everything will be going better.
Okay, talking on both sides, and dialogue is the solution, because if we unite, we can make something big, rather than with someone is just doing everything. If we share, we have different links. So if we combine all those links, we can come up with something big. Than to say we should do this, or only we should unite, then we come up with one thing. Unless one should do, the other one will be pulling back and someone would want to go. So we must all work together as one family. I think that's a good idea.
I think dialogue is a process, and I think to be able to come to a consensus on dialogue is another process. But what I will say is, at the end of the day, you can do as much dialogue as you want. You can do as much interaction as you want. But all people want is the result. So at the end of the day, let's not do dialogue saying this party, because that's the thing that creates boundaries. So let's just do the dialogue based on the fact that this is dialogue for Zimbabweans, amongst Zimbabweans, and all. The only thing that everyone wants is just a simple situation where a solution comes out at the end of the day. That's it. For Zimbabweans, by Zimbabweans. Nothing to do with political parties or who said this or who's going to deliver on something. We just want a result at the end of the day. That's it. Nothing else. It's not about political parties. It's about people coming together in Simunye. They discuss, they come up with the results. A result that benefits everyone and provides value to everyone, and everyone is happy at the end of the day. That's it. That's what we want as Zimbabweans. Nothing else.
Thank you very much. I was going to say that it is absolutely imperative that the political leadership of this country, of all political parties and of all persuasions, of all ideologies, recognize that we as a country have been held back for decades and decades. Zimbabwe should not be here. Zimbabwe should be far ahead where countries in Africa such as Rwanda are. At the time of independence, we were far, far ahead of most, if not all, African countries, maybe with the exception of South Africa. But we are now right at the tail end. Our people are suffering. Joblessness, hunger, non-existent medical facilities, the COVID pandemic in a country without a health system, etc., etc. And we need to recognize that governments are constituted in order to save the people. They are constituted in order to advance the welfare of the people, the well-being of the people. What is happening in Zimbabwe right now is a complete negation of all of those expectations. We have a sitting government which seems to exist solely for self-serving purposes. The political elite seem to believe the notion that they are there to eat and to enrich themselves and never to serve. Say what you will about, for instance, the leadership of Robert Mugabe, misguided as it might have been. They, at the very least, attempted to say we govern through policies. Whether it was the land acquisition, the land reform, whether it was indigenization, whatever it is, they tried to craft some policy. You disagreed with what they were trying to do, but they were trying to do something in terms of a policy, a context. They failed because their policies were bad, but policy considerations. What we have now is a government seemingly constituted solely to save the personal interests of those who are in leadership. Without policy in any area, no health policy, no economic policy, no industrialization policy, the only policy they have is how to retain power through coercion, arrest, weaponization of the law. And this guarantees that we can only get worse and worse and worse as a country. And I say this in order to conclude by saying, it is time to take stock. It is time to reconsider. Leadership should be about saving the people. In this context, saving the people means that we need to establish some national consensus on the way forward. And you can only establish national consensus through dialogue. We do not have to get this country to the bottom of the bottom before we realize that we are headed the wrong way. And the best way, the most peaceful way, is to accept that we are on a wrong trajectory and we must pause for a moment and talk to each other as how we can re-establish the national equilibrium, national consensus for us to be able to have a government in place which truly serves the interests of the people, which is concerned about service, which is concerned about delivery to the people, not concerned about retention of power. When you have a group of men and women whose purpose in politics is to retain power for the sake of power and self-aggrandizement, the country can never prosper, the people can never prosper, and the people will be wailing and crying over and over again from one corner of the country to the other. And we need to get away from that kind of politics peacefully through dialogue. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll come to you, Reverend Tata, for your closing remarks, and also maybe to attempt to deal with what Mugadzaweta actually just raised.
Thank you very much for having me on this very interesting program. I would also say, maybe in my parting words, I think Mr. Mugadzaweta has been answered by Professor Welshman Ncube, because I think this is how I also look at it. It's not impunity when you invest in the future of a just society by pardoning crimes of the past. Sometimes that's the price you have to pay to establish a new order. So I fully agree that in big moments, those moments do not always come, but I think we are in an opportunity for us to transition to a new era where those who feel insecure because of what happened in the past can actually be pardoned in order for us to move forward. But having said this, I also want to part by the following words. I strongly believe that our current political leaders have an opportunity to rewrite their history by ushering this nation into a new direction on the basis of a new national consensus. This national consensus does not seek to replace them with another government. It's a consensus on the basis of establishing a resolution about the hurts of the past in a way that gives a common sense of the future. It is a consensus that is based on establishing an agenda for implementation of the Constitution and the particular reforms that are agreed upon by everyone. It is a consensus that establishes a new economic order on the basis of a new social contract of inclusive economy. it is a new consensus on the basis of being reintegrated into the community of nations, on the basis of a re-engagement at home. We want to re-engage the world on the basis of re-engagement at home. The only opportunity that the present political leadership have is to usher this new era through an inclusive and broad-based national dialogue. And this does not require money. It requires a new commitment that looks at the new horizon that can dawn for all of us. I hope everyone recognizes that this is an opportunity, it's a gift that we can give ourselves 40 years after independence. And if we embrace it, people will forget the pain we have had in the past and can embrace this future in which all Zimbabweans will feel included. I hope that we embrace this opportunity because it doesn't last for a very long time. If we miss it, sometimes we may regret because this chance may move away from us. Thank you very much for having me on your platform.
Thank you very much for this rich discussion that we have had. Thank you very much, Professor Washman Ncube, the Vice President of the MDC Alliance, Nkosana Moyo, the President of APA, Linda Masarira, the President of LEAD, and the ZCC Secretary General, Kenneth Mtata, for having this discussion where we were discussing is dialogue, the solution to Zimbabwe's problems. This program was proudly brought to you by Frederick Newman Foundation in partnership with Heart and Soul TV and Radio. And this is Free Talk, where we believe that conversations help people, help nations to develop. Free speech is an amazing tool of development. It is an amazing tool of engagement of mind and developing a nation. Here at Heart and Soul TV and Radio, thank you very much for joining us on this episode. See you in the next episode where we will be discussing the Patriot Bill. Is it necessary to stifle the voice of civil society, to stifle the voice of free engagement and understanding of people? We will be having members of civil society and political parties to discuss the Patriot Bill. Thank you very much, Washman Ncube, the President of the MDC Alliance. Thank you very much, Kenneth Mtata, the Secretary General of the Zimbabwe Council of Churches. And thank you, our viewers who have been joining us through Facebook. Our Facebook pages, Heart and Soul TV, Heart and Soul Zim, and Newsday pages. We will also be uploading this on our YouTube page the following on Wednesday. So thank you very much and keep supporting us. This is Free Talk, and I am Blessed Mhlanga, Dara B. Thank you very much. This is Free Talk in partnership with Frederick Newman Foundation, our partners in free speech. Free speech is the center of development of any nation.